Thanks for tuning in today to Meet the Candidates 2018. Today our guest is Chuck Eddy, Republican candidate for the 6th District of the United States House of Representatives. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate you coming by. As a reminder to our viewers out there are 435 seats in Congress, and each of those seats or districts represents about 720,000 citizens. Kentucky has 6 seats in Congress, and the 6th Congressional District makes up the westernmost being Frankfort, to the east all the way to Flemingsburg, to the south towards Richmond, includes Lexington, and north to Scott County, and as far north as Mount Olivet in Robertson County. So Chuck Eddy, some folks maybe don't know who you are here in Frankfort, so if you could introduce yourself, who is Chuck and why is he running for Congress?
Well, thanks, John. I appreciate that. Who is Chuck? Well, number one, I've never run for political office today, and I probably wouldn't be here if there were a better current congressman. I'm a moderate Republican, have been all my life. I was born out on the East Coast, and my folks were pretty solid Republicans, but the kind of Republican I am, a moderate Republican, is a lot different than the current crop, many of them who are very involved in the Trump and McConnell and Ryan axis, if you will. So I'm quite a bit more moderate, and I want to bring that forward. I think that what I represent is the more traditional Republican of Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, Eisenhower. Some of my current heroes are McCain and Collins, Murkowski, Graham. I mean, I don't agree with these people on everything, but they certainly symbolize the independent thinking and the more of a non-political, non-doctrinaire approach. So that's where I'm coming from, and I'm running because I think I'm a better option for this 6th district than Mr. Barr.
Well, as you made your way around the 6th District over the course of the last few weeks, and we taped this in late March, so there's still 7 or 8 weeks here before election. What are you hearing are the most important issues facing the 6th District?
Well, I think the most important issues are, number one, to have an effective representative that is actually working for the people as opposed to working for some special interests. And that's one of the big concerns I've had, and I always have had, is the amount of money that's in various campaigns. When you look at people who are supported by the NRA and various special interests, and Mr. Barr is one of those folks, and I'm not, it concerns me that the people themselves are not having the impact that they should have, but these special interests are. You know, as an example, repeal of Dodd-Frank, a lot of it which was to create protections for consumers, has been very much a goal of the current Republican caucus-controlled Congress, removing protections from the consumers that have been put in place after our most recent real estate debacle back in 2007, 2008. And I personally was involved in that. We had a horse farm in eastern Kentucky. We were trying to sell it, move to another place. Sale fell through right at the last minute about that time. So I'm very familiar with what that situation is, and that's I guess the main thing, is to have the district represented by people who are looking to what the people want to do as opposed to what the 1% want to do.
I understand. So let's talk a little bit about maybe a tariff plan. The president's put out a tariff plan, and what's your point of view on free trade and how the tariff plan is going to roll out? I mean, it's only a few weeks old from the tax plan anyway, and I don't know that we necessarily have a great idea on how it's going to impact the economy.
We don't have a good idea of it. Among other things, China just recently has floated the idea that they're going to be putting tariffs on our agricultural products, which are a very important part of our country. My mom was from Illinois, and Illinois, Iowa, Indiana, all these states are very big in terms of agricultural products. Our own state is as well, but some of these larger farm states have the potential for being devastated by that kind of a response. The interesting thing about the aluminum and steel tariffs that President Trump announced is, prior to him announcing them, there didn't really seem to be any call in order to improve our overall economy. Our economy's been in good shape for a number of years now. President Trump has ridden the wave of the improvement in the economy since 2008. But the steel and the aluminum tariffs, when they were first announced, appeared to be primarily aimed at our allies, partially about China. But then he came back and said, so these tariffs are going to apply to everybody? Oh, no, they're just going to apply to China, is really what he came out and said. So if the point was to look at what we did with China, rather than announcing these tariffs, which is completely anti-free trade, which, by the way, the Republican Party of the past was always very supportive of free trade. You look at somebody like Eisenhower, look at somebody like Reagan, and these people, they were not protectionists. Oh my gosh, they were free trade oriented. If we had to do something to deal with China, the way to deal with China is bilateral. Instead of announcing this big thing, getting the entire world perplexed, as it has been by almost every single announcement that President Trump has made, either officially or by tweet. I wish he wouldn't tweet. But so coming back to your question, we don't know what the impact's going to be. I don't think the tariffs in general were a good idea. I'm very concerned that many of the different things that he has proposed will hurt various parts of the economy. When he was talking about tariffs on solar panels. Solar panels is a big part of it. My sister in Kansas City, she and her husband have covered their house with solar panels. It has greatly decreased their cost. So tariffs, I don't think they were a good idea. I think they were poorly announced. I think announcing stuff by tweet is just horrendous and a total going against the normal logical procession of how you run government. It's not running government. It's a mockery of running government, in my opinion. That comes back to part of the reason I'm running for Congress is that the current congressman has not objected to things like the Charlottesville, they're fine people on both sides thing, hasn't objected to the horrible comments made about immigrants or Muslims or women or the thing that Trump did about disabled people, his mockery of that reporter. That concerns me. That silence in the face of very serious, offensive, counter to actual progress governmentally, things that are diminishing us in the face of the world. Those kind of things bother me. And the fact that McConnell and Ryan and Barr are just sitting back quietly saying, we got our tax thing. So whatever else he does, we don't care. So long ways away from the tariffs you originally asked me about.
Let's say it's January 2019 and Chuck Eddy is in the 6th District seat in Congress. How does he interact with the president and with the party, presuming that the party is still in the majority in 2019? What are some of the issues that are just top of mind for you that you really want to work on?
Well, I guess number one, you asked me about how it would interact. One of the things that I'm consciously doing is I'm a moderate Republican. I'll be an independent Republican voice. In other words, this idea of everybody in the caucus has to support this, and this, because it's the party leadership has said this is in fact what ought to happen. Am I a Democrat? No. Am I an independent? No. I'm a Republican, traditional Republican, but I'm going to be an independent voice. One of my biggest concerns, and by the way, it just came out today with or yesterday really, with the firing of VA Secretary Shulkin and the replacement by the personal physician, which by the way, he's been the personal physician for 3 presidents. So that interaction with the president has been very good. It's not been in a management position at all. And he's now going to be appointed to manage one of the most important parts of the government. I have 2 active duty people in my family. I have a niece in the Navy, a nephew in the 82nd Airborne, several veterans. I've got a nephew who's 82nd Airborne veteran. I've got a nephew that was, a brother-in-law who was Air Force. I got a brother-in-law who was Navy. I've got a niece who is Army veteran. By the way, met her husband, also in the 82nd Airborne, in the Army. So for those looking for husbands or wives, the Army is a good place to look. Not just Match.com. Go to the Army. Healthcare, veterans issues, those are very important to me. I'm very concerned that within Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, there's a thing called the 10 basic health essentials, and I think that's a very important part to what that was for. A couple of the things in there: access to free birth control. So a politician is not supposed to say things that might make people not want to vote for them. Not being a politician, I'm personally against abortion, except in the case of rape, incest, and the health of the mother. I also accept Roe v. Wade as the law of the land. The best way to reduce abortions is effective birth control. So how do you continue to reduce abortions? They have been coming down dramatically the last 8 years. Part of that has been the greater availability of free birth control, the greater availability of the doctor's visits that come through the 20+ million people who got health care through Affordable Care Act and Medicaid that were put at risk when people like Andy Barr voted against that even before the Congressional Budget Office report came out. You know, I went to the town hall meeting in Lafayette High School, April 24th of last year, I believe it was. I asked the first question, and my point was, these are important factors. You've also got mental health counseling that's part of 10 basic health essentials, substance abuse counseling, part of 10 basic health essentials, along with the access to free medical care. And I said, please don't vote on this bill until after the Congressional Budget Office came out. I guess that's really what started me going on this, because he did vote, like his management, I'll say management, his leadership, told him to vote. And what that meant is, even before he knew what impact it was going to have, he said, we're going to tear this thing down. It doesn't matter. So at that town hall meeting, which hundreds and hundreds of people attended, I asked the first question. He voted anyway against it. So healthcare is extremely important to me. Proper veterans care, very, very important to me. As I said, I've got a lot in my family, a lot amongst my friends. That's very important. I'm concerned. I don't know anything about the management ability of this personal physician. I know he's been the personal physician for Bush, Obama, and Trump. Does that train you to run a $200 billion department? My guess is no.
I appreciate the comments on that. Well, I'm going to stick with something that's not closely related, but we hear a lot about drug overdoses and the opioid scourge here in America, and I was kind of curious what your ideas are on how to address this epidemic.
Well, I think, not to give a political answer, but that's a really tough question. I'm glad you asked me that. That's probably our toughest domestic problem right now. Between the gun epidemic and the opioid epidemic, we've got two very, very serious problems. Again, going back to the 10 basic health essentials, I was part of several meetings in Representative Barr's office here in Lexington, Kentucky, where 10, 15, 20 of us came and met with his local district manager. I can't remember his exact title, the district legislative assistant, whatever. But we met with him. One of the biggest concerns we had was this whole health care thing. I had a very interesting comment from one of the women who came one day. She's a psychiatrist, and we were meeting in Lexington. And she said, since the Affordable Care Act was passed, we've had more people come out of Eastern Kentucky for counseling, mental health counseling and substance abuse counseling. Many of these people had never been to a doctor. They didn't have health care. They couldn't afford it. They now had access to this. And one of her big concerns is the progress we're making in working on substance abuse and mental health issues, many of which are intertwined, is going to get rolled back if we reject that. Now, fortunately, due to Senator John Glenn and his famous thumb, the repeal of Obamacare, Affordable Care Act as it existed did not happen. Now, mind you, Trump and the administration has been chipping away at this thing various places to try to gut it any way they can without actually having the votes to gut it. But that's an example of the kind of progress we have to make. So the opioid crisis has to be attacked on several fronts. Number one is the counseling is vitally important. Number two, the overprescription. I don't remember the county, but there's a county in West Virginia where apparently the number of prescriptions sold it was equivalent to, and I may be off on the numbers, I think it was 600 doses per every man, woman, and child in that county. Now that includes infants. That's insane, okay? So we have to better control those prescriptions. The manufacturers have to be held accountable. The doctors have to be held accountable. Eastern Kentucky and Florida had a kind of a connection for a while of pain pills and various things. And that's a serious thing. So we need to address that, get that much more under control. We have to address the physicians who are going overboard in these prescriptions, and the counseling is so vitally important. And the idea, for instance, in our state, of the governor trying to assist in gutting things like Medicaid is a big concern to me, because these are the things that these people need. The idea that people who are on Medicaid are just sitting around collecting checks, let's make sure they get a job now. One of the proposals that the administration approved of Governor Bevin's doing, let's go get a job. That's fine. But I've traveled around Eastern Kentucky. To say let's go get a job is going to be tough in areas where you've already got high unemployment. And part of the reason is because there aren't the jobs. So again, circling back to the counseling is so vitally important. The involvement of families is important, but getting the physicians to back off on what they're doing. I heard a recent suggestion somebody said, which is the doctors should be only able to prescribe 8 days worth of pain pills. So that in order to get an extension on that, there has to be another meeting, has to be another appointment. Now, that's where the Affordable Care Act and where Medicaid comes into play. How are they going to go back and see it? But 8 days of pills, you can't sell those on the street. It's when you have these large supplies that's a problem. So hopefully that answers your question about the opioid crisis. By the way, I have a friend of mine who had a family member that passed away of that. I know several of my friends in Eastern Kentucky that have had family members that suffered from this. It's personal. Kentucky has one of the biggest problems.
Well, you touched on, I appreciate your comments. You touched on at the very beginning on guns, and there's significant, I think most would say there's significant momentum to do something about gun measures, something very drastic, or maybe just something just in the interim. Where do you, what's your views on that?
So last Saturday, in the cold rain, I was down in Lexington at the March for Our Lives. There was probably about 1,500 or 2,000 of us is my estimate. And remember, you're talking to a guy who's not trained in crowd measuring, but it seemed like it was about 1,500 to 2,000, organized by the local students, facilitated by some organizations. I'm part of a group called Bluegrass Activists Alliance. I've been a member of it ever since the morning I woke up after President Trump was elected. Guns. I believe in the Second Amendment. It gives us the right to have and to bear arms. I also believe that that Second Amendment does not give free, unfettered access to what I call semi-automatic, rapid-fire, military-style weapons. So where I am right now is I want to see the immediate suspension of manufacture, import, or sales of all semi-automatic, rapid-fire, military-style weapons, both rifles and pistols. Suspension, not ban, suspension. And the reason I say that is we need to move towards a rational, sensible gun policy in this country. And I believe that means we've got to address the types of guns that are out and about. The idea that today you can get unlimited supplies of ammunition, There's a story in the newspaper just this week that this kid, who I believe he goes to Lawrence Dunbar. I'm not going to name any names for two reasons. Number one, that wouldn't be proper. Number two, I don't remember the name, so I'm easily going to satisfy that. Apparently, he was given some money for a tattoo, and he spent it on a semi-automatic weapon of some sort. It may or may not have been an AR-15, and 500 rounds of ammunition. So why do you buy 500 rounds of ammunition? Why do you need 500 rounds of ammunition? So in addition to suspending that, while we decide what to do about them, we as a nation, I also believe that we should implement the universal background check. Gun shows, private sales, online sales, trades, or gifts. 10-day waiting period. In other words, if I'm going to give my daughter a gun, she needs to go through a background check. She needs to wait needs to wait 10 days before it changes hands from me to her. Also, each gun purchase, trade, or gift, there needs to be some kind of liability insurance. I don't know exactly what it's going to be yet. Some people have proposed that every gun should have an additional amount, same to the money, put into some kind of a fund. I don't know how it would work, but I look at it as liability insurance. We have it for cars. People who say guns shouldn't be, controlled or restricted forget the fact that cars are. There should also be liability insurance when you purchase ammunition. Is it going to be the same amount as a $2,000 gun purchase? No. I'm not proposing, and I will never propose, confiscation of legally obtained firearms, period. Okay? People talk about, well, when you say suspension, you're talking ban. No, I'm not. I'm talking about we need to figure out what we're doing. And even if we decide to put these controls on future purchases, even if we did something like the assault weapons ban in 1994 to 2004, which was only on certain weapons, okay? Even if we did something like that, and I don't know if that's what we should do, because remember I said suspension. I didn't say I knew all the answers, because I don't. But even if we do something like that, that still is not going to impact what you already have in your house, what Chuck already has in his house, what my friends in Eastern Kentucky already have in their houses. They acquired it legally. I'm not going to go in. I'm not going to recommend anybody go in. I'm not going to vote for in the Congress, we're going to take these weapons back. Australia did a buyback. If we do a buyback or something, that'd be fine. But I'm not going to recommend taking. I'm not aware of anybody who has ever said, let's take these guns back. So hopefully that gives you some answers.
Well, I appreciate that. I think there is momentum behind it, and I think it'll be something that they take up in 2019 as they get back in a regular session. If you don't mind, let's move over to foreign policy and national security. Again, we're the last week of March. This is going to play back in April and May, so who knows where we'll be at that point. But the president has announced change at Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, changes at the CIA. Russia and North Korea have been top of page since almost the very first day of the administration. What are your views on where America is today and where we may be going?
I'm very concerned. I shouldn't say the word scared, but I'm very concerned with the volatility that President Trump has brought to the presidency. Actively undermining the Secretary of State. I can't in my lifetime remember anybody doing that. A private conversation behind closed doors, a private conversation, no holds barred, all bunch of, really bad language maybe, but behind closed doors. But to tweet out after Tillerson said something about North Korea, and to tweet out, he shouldn't waste his time with Little Rocket Man. That's extremely bad. The insults that he's done, his, retweeting a massively racist tweet from a group in Britain that turned out to be totally, totally false. All these things affect us internationally. Our role in the world is diminishing tremendously, and it should not be. The turnover in the, I am concerned, before we started this interview, I was commenting on your gentleman's awesome facial hair. I don't have a mustache to compete with John Bolton. The John Boltons, all these people, Mike Pompeo, these people who are being thrust into these extremely important positions concern me. They don't have the experience, they don't have the international outlook that I think we need to be part of the world, the nationalistic outlook that Steve Bannon first brought into the outhouse. Okay, that was not a Freudian slip. I accidentally said that. The White House is what I meant to say. It's very disturbing because our standing in the world, our respect in the world is just dropping down. We pulled out of the Paris Climate Accords. Not a panacea, not a perfect answer, but we were very much in the forefront of trying to deal with these climate things. Internationalist, okay, globalist, things that are supposedly bad words are not bad words. We're part of the world. We've been a major leader in the world since World War II. We need to continue that way. The whole idea of the EPA administrator Pruitt saying, okay, so we're going to change these things. We don't want you to really talk about climate change as much anymore. That's not this administration's opinion. Yes, the administration's opinion goes against 97% of the scientists. It's a serious matter. I can see the day that President Trump or EPA Administrator Pruitt might be called before some kind of court for damaging further the American environment and the world environment. It's very, very scary. So coming back to what you asked me, the internationalists, our standing in the international community is extremely important. Trump has managed to alienate many, many other world leaders. He pulled out a TPP, good or bad, the way he did it was not good. So they've gotten together and done this anyway. Our influence in the Pacific has diminished greatly. Europe, he's been fighting with Europe. Our influence in Europe is diminishing greatly. Isolationism is not a good way to go. Going back to your original question about tariffs a while ago, that's not a good way to go. We've got to work together with these people. We have a problem with China, work together with China. They're very important to us with North Korea. The North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, just went and met with the Chinese president, cutting some of the legs out from underneath Trump's attempts towards North Korea. So international is an extremely important thing. I'm concerned about the people that are going to be nominated for Secretary of State. The director of the CIA, I'm very concerned about. I don't think she should be approved or passed. So hopefully that answered your questions.
It has. I appreciate it very much. Thanks again. We've run out of time today. Chuck Eddy, Republican candidate for 6th District, the United States House of Representatives. Thanks for coming by today. Remember to get out and vote on May 22nd. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.